Good evening, everyone. We will start in just a couple of minutes. I am live streaming it on YouTube right now, making sure it's working. All right, I think we should get started. It's already 7:32. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Ravina Nimbalkar, and I'm the Executive Director here at NAMI Santa Clara County. Before we begin the presentation for tonight, I'm just going to go over some of the updates here at NAMI. Our helpline is up and running from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday by phone as well as email. We do have, you can come into the office between 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. for walk-in to meet with the helpline staff. We also have after-hour family support, which is available on evenings and weekends. All our support groups are listed on our website. Our website is namisantaclara.org and offered over Zoom as well as in person. So you can take a look at what works for you. For education classes such as family to family, familiar to familiar, persona to persona, peer to peer, provider education, you can contact the helpline number, which is 408-453-0400 and select option 1 to get further details and put yourself on the interest list. NAMI Basics is on demand on our website and which you can take at your own pace, and so is NAMI Homefront. The next MH101 for our FaithNet program is going to take place in 2 days, which is May 16th at 11:30 a.m. I believe if you already get our emails, you would have gotten an email today about it on how to register. But if you still need some help, feel free to call us, and we can let you know how you can do that. Our community peer program continues to match via hospitals as well as self-referrals. So if you need any assistance with that, you can find more information on our website or call our helpline. Okay, so NAMI Walk Silicon Valley is going to be on Saturday, October 5th. So please save the date. The NAMI Walks website has been launched, and we have, I think it's already mid of May, so we're kind of getting there, and things are moving fast now before they actually move very fast. The annual NAMI picnic is going to be on Saturday, June 8th. This is at the Family Circle area and Kelly Park in San Jose. If you do get our emails, you would have received an invite email to RSVP. Please RSVP for yourself and then RSVP for any plus ones that you get into individually, because we need the names of the people coming in. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and to honor this, we have kickstarted our stigma-free mental health presentations. And we're also going to have a yoga session at a yoga studio this coming weekend. I believe it's on May 19th. And we also have a contest. We sent out an email about a contest, and you can win some amazing prizes. We will be sending more emails, so please stay tuned to get updates and get the location of where the yoga session is going to take place and what the contest is all about. So do stay tuned. Okay, so that's with my updates, and I will pass it on to Maureen, who is the Vice President of the Board at NAMI Santa Clara County. Over to you, Maureen.
Great, thank you, Ravina. So this evening, it's really my pleasure to introduce Dr. Balan. He specializes in the treatment of people with psychiatric disorders, including schizophrenia, and he is the co-director of Inspire Clinic at Stanford, which provides interdisciplinary care for people experiencing psychosis. He is also the co-division chief for the general adult psychiatric and psychology department. And Dr. Balan completed his residency at Stanford in 2009 and a schizophrenia research fellowship at Columbia University in 2011. And this evening, he is going to talk a little bit about the current pipeline of medication for schizophrenia, and he's going to focus on the medication in the trial clinics at the Department of Psychiatry at Stanford University. And it's going to touch on different mechanisms and how they can make for fewer and at least different side effects. So I am going to turn it over to Dr. Ballin.
All right, Marie, thanks.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks so much. All right, so I'm going to share some slides.
And while Dr. Ballin is actually sharing his slide, I just want to mention, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A section, and please feel free to chat just if you want to make any comments. So just wanted to make sure that we go through everything then. Sorry, go ahead, Dr. Ballin.
Yeah, that's fine. I will do my best to keep my right eye on the questions in the chat as best I can, although we'll have time at the end. It's my pleasure, of course, to come and speak to everybody. It's been a few years since I've had a chance to speak to a NAMI group. I will say off the bat that I'm a little underdressed. I came from my son's Little League playoff baseball game, and so I want to make sure that I got here on time. So here I am. They were winning, so in case anybody's concerned, and if you see me checking my phone, it's probably because I got the score update, not because of the Giants and Dodgers that are also playing. What I will do at the onset is, yes, I can send the slides. Everything except for one slide is something that I cut and paste off the internet, so they're all basically findable. But I'm happy to share these slides. That being said, I wasn't really being very careful about what is copyrighted or not, so we'll just keep that as well. All right, there we go. So as we get started, I direct the Inspire Clinic. This is from our homepage. This is most of the people in the clinic. One thing that I just want to say at the outset that is always a little difficult when I give talks publicly is that we're going to talk about a lot of interesting things. I'm happy to also answer questions about the clinic. What I can't really do is answer specific questions about an individual situation in this kind of a context. That's sort of beyond the scope. I wouldn't necessarily know enough about all of the context to be able to answer really personal questions. The other part that I just, as far as ground rules are concerned, is that I'm happy to entertain, the possibility of treatment in the clinic. We do have a number of limits, and the biggest limit that we face is around Medi-Cal. And so one of the things that we'll talk about today is some of the clinical trials that we do. Sometimes that can be an opportunity for people to have some interface with us in the clinic. It's not necessarily the full clinic experience, but it's at least a reasonable kind of extended second opinion. So if there's a clinical trial that we're recruiting for or that sounds of interest, I will make sure you can email me. I'll have that available, or you can call our phone number as well, and we will hook you up with that. Otherwise, to sort of see about in the treatment in the Inspire Clinic, if you go to the Stanford Psychiatry Clinic homepage, there's information about the sort of various insurances and all that kind of stuff that can sometimes gets in the way of us providing care for everybody that we might want to. But I just want to put that out there at the outset. Today, though, we're going to focus on. Is my volume too low? Can't hear me? All right, I think my volume should be okay.
You're fine.
Okay, so we will. I'm going to focus on sort of on new treatments. Now, one of the things I will say is at the outset too is that there are a lot of different treatments for schizophrenia. There are a lot of antipsychotics on the market. We're going to focus today on the pipeline. What's sort of maybe the next things to come out. I'm going to talk about some of the newest medicines that are out as well. That is not to say that generic medications don't have a role, or that everybody should be on the newest medications. There's a lot of good that can be done at this stage. So this is the one slide that's pretty much not on the internet, but it's a back of the napkin type drawing that I did with one of my colleagues around all right, let's just think about what is kind of our treatment algorithm for folks. And what we're going to be spending our time with is kind of sort of down in this area here a little bit over in this area. But there's a lot of good treatment that can be done up in here, right? And so we're not going to focus on that, but if things are going well and you're taking medications that are in the upper part of the algorithm, that's great. It gets really complicated to get some of the newest medications. in terms of coverage and all of that, and then finding in the pharmacy. So it's great that we have options. I'm excited that we're going to talk about what might be some new options, including one that looks pretty certain to be made available later this year. But just to know that there are a lot of things. So just to walk through real quick, though, this is my general algorithm, which is if an antipsychotic is needed at the outset, I'm usually thinking about risperidone or aripiprazole, right? Also known as Risperdal and Abilify. I like these medications to start because they give a lot of flexibility. They can be done in long-acting form. They are generic, so they are notably less expensive than some of the branded medicines that we're going to talk about today. You can actually take them as even sublingual. They're available in a variety of forms. They're well tolerated by a lot of people. They work well for a lot of people. We know a lot about them because they've been around for such a long time. But they don't work for everybody, and so we have to sometimes continue our way down the algorithm. Now, in the beginning, it's sort of sometimes hard to tell whether a medicine is not working because of side effects or because of response, right? And so, we bring on a second medication you tried. It often has to be a generic medicine because, again, insurance usually won't cover branded medicines unless you've tried at least 2 generics. So we're going to try, if we try risperidone, we'll probably try aripiprazole or, vice versa, or we'll try something else that's generic. And then we start to really look into, are we talking about efficacy failures? Is the psychosis just not changing? If that's the case, do we need to rethink what's going on? Is this maybe something that looked like schizophrenia, but there's a medical component that we might, need to dig into, like, inflammatory disorder or something like that we need to, sort of take a step back. Sometimes that's the case. Often that's, a rare thing, but it's still something that we have to think through. We might think about as another step is, using olanzapine, which is a generic, but which you don't typically want to use in the beginning because of side effects like weight gain. We're going to talk in a minute about the version of olanzapine that comes with samidorphan, though, so that, again, maybe helps in this category. And then historically, the algorithm said after 2 medications don't work, you go straight to clozapine. And so clozapine certainly is an option even at this stage, but so I might try the olanzapine samidorphan first. We'll see. Anyway, then this is also where you're starting to fall off the algorithm, and so things have to start getting a little more creative. And sometimes you find that even though it doesn't make sense pharmacologically, that 2 antipsychotics work, or we're adding an antidepressant or mood stabilizer. We're starting to kind of mix and match a little bit, and that can be okay. It also can sometimes get messy and have to be wary of side effects. Clozapine is a really important medicine. I imagine we'll have some questions about that at the end. We have a lot of people in the Inspire Clinic who are on clozapine. And ECT is an option. It's not one that we pursue very often. In fact, it's pretty unlikely. If I could rearrange the slide, it would be kind of off the screen. But it is something that is, for consideration, and maybe not necessarily at stage 3, but somewhere in the efficacy failure pathway. On the other side of things, side effects are a big concern. And I tend to lump the side effects in my head into 2 kind of main categories. So the category that we talk about kind of the most with the newer antipsychotics in particular is weight gain and metabolic symptoms, right? So that's where people are gaining weight, and with olanzapine, I'm sure many of you have seen that happen where people can gain significant amounts of weight. I've seen people gain up to 100 pounds. It's a testament to how well olanzapine can work psychiatrically that people would sometimes be willing to withstand that, and that's the right choice. And so just because there's a side effect doesn't necessarily mean we change, but it certainly means we need to have a conversation about it. And at 100 pounds, I start to worry about the downstream health consequences. But for a lot of young people, weight gain is an issue, but drowsiness is also a really crucial issue. And you can imagine that if you are a young person in early stages of a psychotic illness, which is, again, generally going to be college age or young adult, that we're really trying, in the Inspire Clinic and elsewhere, to keep people as engaged in their life as they might be, right? And so that means that we're really trying to keep people involved in school, in work, socially. If drowsiness is too big of an issue, then the medicine is in some ways going to, get in the way of any benefit you might have. And so sleeping 12, 13, 14 hours a day, as some people might have, well, then you can't really participate in school and you can't really go out with friends and you can't do any of the things that we're hoping the medicine is going to help you do. And so that's a real problem. When that happens, I'm looking for some of the medications that tend to not be as risky for weight gain. Generally speaking, at this point, there's really no medicine that's been shown to have no risk of weight gain. Maybe the closest one is a medicine called Molindone, which was off the market for a while and it's sort of available, but not really. And it's an old medicine, has its other issues. So weight gain is always a concern. I will say that some of the newer ones, lumateperone has some interesting data around people changing to lumateperone and losing some weight. Again, it's not that it's a weight loss medicine, but maybe that they're just coming off of something that was causing some weight gain. So these tend to be pretty reasonable. 10% or fewer people will gain weight on these medicines. But it's still something that we have to monitor. And again, drowsiness being a big issue is also something. Older medicines in particular, but even risperidone, paliperidone, and the like, can cause anxiety or movements that can be difficult to manage. And so sometimes we're going to treat that with a second agent, but sometimes the better answer is to change to something that's going to be a little bit more easily tolerable, especially when it comes to anxiety. So that's where quetiapine can sometimes play a role. Again, you'll see olanzapine, samidorphan. These are, again, can be hard because, again, if you're trying to function in the world and the medicine is causing you to be jittery and anxious and have movements, it can be hard to feel comfortable. So we look to sometimes we have to make changes on that front. So what do we have coming down the pipeline? This is kind of a quick table of contents of what we're going to talk about. And just to say that I'm not going to get too much into the TAR1 agonists today because it's unclear whether there was two that were being studied and one of them did not make it, and so the other one is kind of on life support, so to speak. It had one positive trial and it had one trial that was called a failed trial. So in essence, the placebo group did so well that you can't really tell if it was the placebo effect or the medicine, and so that makes it really hard to necessarily get that medicine approved on that level, because you need, in order to get an FDA approval, you need two separate studies that are positive. So they sort of have 1.5. So we'll see if this one makes it or not. It's been kind of hanging in the balance for a while. But we're going to talk about muscarinic agonists because this is where there is going to be some new news later this year. I'm going to mention a medicine that's already on the market, but that we're part of a clinical trial looking at a different use for it. I'm not going to get really into new second-generation antipsychotics. There is one that is being studied that might make it, but it doesn't really, to me, add that much interesting. It's not a new mechanism. It's not really that different than what's already out there. So it's nice to get another option, but it's not really something that moves the needle. The other thing that we're going to get into a bit is that thus far, all the medicines on the market, and these are included in that, focus on the positive symptoms of schizophrenia. And what do I mean by positive symptoms? These are the voices, visions, paranoia, delusions, the things that exist kind of in excess of what one might expect. So, hearing voices in particular is one, and feeling paranoid, watched or followed. So we have a lot of medicines that's what they target. And again, it's not that those are totally sufficient, because there's still many folks for whom the medicines aren't sufficient for them. But we have some of those, and these are going to help with that. And again, I think do so with a better tolerable pathway. But what we don't have is we don't have any medicines that are specifically intended to help with the negative symptoms or the cognitive symptoms. And arguably, in fact, not arguably, in fact, these are the symptoms that really do drive prognosis the most. Back to my discussion around being too drowsy. If the medicine that you take is intended to help with you functioning, in work and school and socially and all the various things that people would want to do, well, it turns out that people can, especially with psychotherapy and other treatments, can often figure out ways to manage in spite of some voices or some positive symptoms. It's not that that's easy. That it's incredibly difficult for folks. It takes a lot of work. But at the end of the day, many people are able to manage, even in spite of the fact that these medicines don't make the symptoms go away 100%. But what's really difficult is if you are trying to get ahead of, and do all the things you want to do, and the illness or other things are making it hard to get out of bed, making it hard to feel motivated, making it hard to maintain hygiene, be social, read other people's social cues. That there's cognitive symptoms that we know that can slow down reaction time, make it harder also to do things like verbal learning, taking down a list or hearing what the professor might be lecturing you about and writing it down and staying with it in class. Difficulty with things like executive functioning. I need to do task A before I do task B so that I can do task C. And I got to remember the order and keep them all kind of online and remember what to do and prioritize things. Those are all things that as a group, people with schizophrenia struggle with. And individuals will vary, but as a large group, that's what we see. So there's been a number of medicines over the years that have tried to come into this area, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about why that's really, really hard to get a medicine approved for these symptoms, but also why it'd be really important if we did it. So there's a couple of medicines that are in the final stages of trying. These are the mechanisms, and so we'll talk about those for a minute. And then I'm not really going to get into this category, which is some of the other treatments, but they're interesting. You may have heard a lot about TMS and including the SAINT protocol for depression, which shows really incredible efficacy for folks with severe depression. It turns out that the structures we're looking at being most relevant for schizophrenia are really hard to get a magnet to. The magnet really does better on kind of the outer parts of the brain, and we're more interested in some of the inner parts. But it's still something that people are looking into. How are there ways that we can very carefully target certain circuits that without just necessarily doing things to the outer circuits? Anyway, it's something that I'm optimistic for eventually, but we don't have much in the way of treatment right now. VR, virtual reality, augmented reality, there's some really interesting data around that that's come out of England and elsewhere around modeling hallucinations and things using virtual reality and giving people psychological tools to be able to combat them. Again, very interesting. And then there's a number of different digital and app related things. We may be part of a study using one of those at some point. Yeah. Yeah, it is the evening. Okay. So anyway, so I'm not going to focus on those, but we may actually be part of a study for a digital app at some point in about 6 months or so. We'll see. And of course, if we do, I'm happy to have people join us. So this slide maybe is a little bit blurry for everybody. It's fine. It's kind of an amalgamation of all of the different mechanisms that we might talk about. And I'll be honest with you, I can kind of fake my way through some of the mechanistic slides. I will do my best. I don't find it super, super compelling. And why do I say that? Well, I tend to be a little bit more of a holistic thinker. And so you'll note that like in my algorithm, I kind of break things down into categories. I get concerned that when you break things down too specifically into any one mechanistic area, that we get a little reductionistic in things. We lose sight of actually what is the big picture. And we start to think that, in fact, psychiatry is as simple as a cartoon like this or a jigsaw puzzle, where if I just raise up one receptor's amount and decrease this other one, that's going to be the answer. And so I think that that kind of thinking, that kind of approach to psychopharmacology never has really resonated with me, never really worked for me. And it's not really how I think. So we'll talk about some mechanisms. I'm happy to do my best, but that's really not where I like to focus my time, other than to say categorically, it's nice to know that there are some different mechanisms. So for example, here's a representation of M1, M4, which we're going to talk about. This is the muscarinic drugs here. It's nice to know that these are different in some ways than the dopamine drugs, right? And so where's the D2 receptors right here? All of these neurotransmitters at some point or another interrelate with each other. So again, nothing is as perfectly clean as you would, as the sort of the slide would want you to think, but it's still of interest. So to me, why is that interesting? Well, it is interesting when you have something that does work in a totally separate way, because it allows for you to have that same kind of benefit that you might have when you have a really severe headache and you take Tylenol, and that's not quite enough, but then you take some ibuprofen, and now it's gone, because they work similarly, but different enough that they can be synergistic. And so what I'm hoping for, again, as we get some of these newer mechanisms, we'll start to be able to actually combine medications in a way that actually makes a little bit more sense and actually may allow for, again, different dosing to help mitigate certain side effects. And again, there's bound to be, psychosis is a really heterogeneous kind of thing. And, there's a number of different biological mechanisms, there's social determinants, there's all kinds of things that can work together to kind of create what ends up looking like psychosis for somebody. And what we don't really know is, on an individual level, what exactly is going on. And so we only really right now have medicines that work here through the dopamine D2 receptor. That's about it. Everything is a variant on that. Sure, you have lumateperone here that does a little bit of glutamate action, right? There's different drugs do various different things with some of the other monoamines in terms of serotonin and histamine and the like. But at the end of the day, the D2 receptor is what is giving the most bang for your buck as far as the antipsychotics, and that's what we have. If you go back to Thorazine in the 1950s, that's it. So now we're looking at some other mechanisms, and so hopefully that will allow them to work together a little bit better. And so here you can see these are the trace amino associated receptors. It's not amino acids, amino associated receptors, TAR1s, which are inside cells, and they are incredibly trace amines. They're very, very, very small amounts that circulate around, but they actually act almost like shock absorbers and can do a variety of things to all the neurotransmitters, in particular dopamine. Xanomeline, which was a great drug that was intolerable with side effects, we'll talk about in a minute, gives some hope over here. The alpha-7 nicotinic receptors were studied for cognition, the theory being that nicotine, that people with schizophrenia smoke a lot, and maybe there was a reason for that. These drugs largely did not make it. I think there's also a lot of other explanations for why people with mental illness historically have smoked more than average. Again, we don't have to get into that tonight, but anyway, these drugs didn't really make it. Here's lumateperone. And here we're going to talk about luvadaxistat, which is here. We're going to talk about, let's see. Anyway, these are most of what we're going to talk about. So that's just kind of a high-level overview. I want to talk just for a quick minute on some of the newer medicines that are out there, just because I want people to know that they exist. I want people to know that they can ask for them if it's the right thing. I'm told now that lumateperone, also known trade name of Caplyta, does some advertising, so maybe people have heard of it a little bit more at this point. It had the misfortune of being released in June of 2020, and so that kind of it got subsumed under the other news of the day. Lumateperone is interesting because it does have this dopamine benefit, but it does have some more glutamatergic modulation. We think of that as being related maybe to cognition and negative symptoms. It initially came out as only one dose of 42 milligrams. It's now available in some lower dosing if need be. It has shown some nice weight gain data. A lot of people think of lumateperone, which also is now indicated for bipolar depression as well, as being really better suited for this use. But there are definitely some people for whom I use it for who have schizophrenia. And so just it's one that, again, may have fallen under the radar. Cariprazine, also known as Vraylar, similar in many ways to aripiprazole or Abilify in that it's also a partial agonist. You can see it has a lot of different uses. One of the things that can be really useful for cariprazine is that it has this really long half-life, which means that it takes weeks for the active metabolite actually to kind of be out of your body. That can be a little bit of a problem if you're having problems with the medicine, but it actually can be quite useful if you miss a dose, for example. So sometimes in young people that's helpful. It does cause some drowsiness and some restlessness, but in my experience, it tends to be one that actually people do really well when the other medicines cause drowsiness. It tends to keep people a little bit more awake. And so it's helpful I use it for a lot of my students and people who, are engineers or other folks who they just can't afford in their life to have the medicine give them brain fog or drowsiness. And then also on the market now is the olanzapine and samidorphan combination, also known as Lybalvi. Lybalvi is, again, it has olanzapine in it or Zyprexa in it. So the samidorphan, which works as an opiate blocker, kind of like naltrexone or naloxone. It blocks the effect of things like Vicodin or heroin or any kind of opiate. But it turns out that it also that this particular there's a number of different opiate receptors, and this combination seems to also directly impact weight gain. Both maybe because it reduces cravings. We see that with naltrexone, which is one of the reasons it's used for alcohol dependence. But also, it seems that it may do something directly as well to actually mitigate weight gain. And I'm not going to show a lot of data for it, but the initial studies showed that the weight gain was about the same for olanzapine and Lybalvi in the first 6 weeks, but that at the end of 6 weeks, the olanzapine group continued to gain weight, whereas the Lybalvi group stayed flat. And I was recently part of a publication that we just presented at a conference, and it's going to get presented around a bit more over the next few months, and a paper will come out soon talking about how we looked at people going for as long as 4 years in the trials, and about half of the subjects made it for 2 years on the drug. About a third made it for all 4 years. Unfortunately, many of the subjects were actually in the Ukraine or Russia, and so that truncated their ability to participate. But nonetheless, we saw that actually for the folks for whom this drug worked, the folks that were able to stay in the study, it worked really, really well. Hospitalizations were very, very low. Weight gain, diabetes, cholesterol, all were flat. In fact, people gained less weight in the 4 years than you would expect as sort of the background risk for weight gain, which is about half a pound to a pound a year. Over the course of 4 years, people gained about 2 pounds. So anyway, so again, an interesting drug that's worth considering, especially if olanzapine is really working well psychiatrically, but there's weight gain. You say, well, I can't afford to try something different. This is a good option to try to fight that off. Okay, so we're going to go, I want to go through some of these newer medicines. The one that is the furthest along in all this is called CAR-XT. It's probably going to get a new name because CAR stands for Karuna. Karuna was bought by, I think it was Bristol Myers Squibb, and for many, many billions of dollars. This drug is expected to go before the FDA, and that has passed its 2 trials. It looks like it is passing its safety trials, and so it's going to likely be approved in the 4th quarter of this year. And my understanding is that once it's approved, it will hit the market actually fairly quickly. There's a lot of pent-up interest, and again, you don't spend more than $10 billion on a drug you don't want to get out into the market once it's ready. So it's going to make it out there pretty soon. I'm sure we will hear a lot about it. This is a muscarinic agonist. What's interesting, the X and the T. So X stands for xanomeline, which was the drug I mentioned before on that complicated slide, which we've known for a long time as a muscarinic agonist is very helpful for antipsychotic benefit. The problem is that when you take a muscarinic agonist, you get diarrhea, you get upset stomach. It's very hard to tolerate. And so you could see the curves were great. People's psychosis just went, way down, but nobody could really tolerate it. It was too uncomfortable. So somebody came along and said, what would be the way that we could harness that benefit? We know that there are muscarinic receptors in the brain, and we know there's muscarinic receptors in the gut. And so what is it that we can do to get the parts that we want without the parts we don't want? And so they screen tons of muscarinic blockers, but of course you can't block the muscarinic receptor too strongly, or you get the opposite problem, constipation and other things like that, so that become intolerable. So it's got to be just right. And it turned out this drug tropsium, which is used for overactive bladder, does not get into the brain, which was important, and it blocked the muscarinic receptors just enough to be essentially tolerable. So this is from one of their trials. You can see in the green part here, this is CAR-XT, this is the placebo, but then everybody switches to open label here. So suddenly the people who were on placebo for this part, they get the drug, and boom, the curves get pretty close to each other. And when these bars don't overlap, that means that it's statistically significant difference. Once they overlap, which they do starting here, you can see it's essentially statistically they're the same. So this is what has everybody interested. The PANSS is a positive and negative symptom score or scale for schizophrenia. it's a typical way of assessing symptoms. I will say that just because symptoms go down, that doesn't mean functioning improves, but we use symptoms as our benchmark for assessing whether drugs have efficacy or not, at least as far as getting things approved. So there's efficacy. Again, this is of some interest because here's the negative symptom scale, sort of a sub-scale from the PANSS. This is not what the study is powered to determine, so we can't draw as conclusive an inference from it, but we can see that at least there's some reason to believe that it does improve over time with the negative symptoms. We don't have anything else that does that. And at least at week 5, we can see it's definitely different, although, again, who knows why week 3 and 4 it suddenly went up and down, who knows. It's of interest. It's something that we'll pay attention to. It's not going to be something that the FDA is going to give it an indication for negative symptoms, but we will monitor that. Now, other drugs have had similar kinds of data in the past that haven't really managed to show that over time, so hard to say. This is looking at just, what percentage of people had a greater than 30% improvement symptoms-wise. And so, over the course of a year, somewhere on the average of 75% of people. Now, again, you can also see how many people ended up here. So the people who do well do really well, but it's only about a third of the overall folks. So we don't really, with this, we don't necessarily know why folks didn't continue. But no drug is meant for everybody. If a third of people are going to do great, then that's really helpful to know. And again, this, I think, in my mind, this is going to be fine on its own, but it'll be really interesting to see how it works with other antipsychotics. We're about to launch a KarXT trial for people to be part of a KarXT trial that is going to look at using KarXT as an adjunct medicine. So we'll have that hopefully ready to launch in the next week or two. That's going to be for people who have residual symptoms, but haven't been in the hospital. So they're sort of stable in many ways, but their symptoms are still not where they'd like them to be. And so we'll be really interested in finding folks for that study starting very soon. Emraclidine is another. So this is a different way of addressing this muscarinic problem, which is to say, you can either block the peripheral effects, or you can come up with a drug that really only goes into the brain and only affects areas of the brain. And that's the strategy for emraclidine. So it's called an M1/M4 allosteric modulator. It is the M1 and M4. There's 5 main muscarinic receptors. 1 and 4 are in the brain. 2, 3, and 5 are in the periphery. So this attaches itself kind of to the side of the receptor and can change the receptor a bit, but only really attaches to the ones that are in the brain. And so therefore, the expectation is that it won't cause too much in the way of side effects. This is from an early study, so this has a lot longer to go. It's only in phase 2 right now. But again, this is the kind of data that prompts companies to purchase it. And so I forget, I think it might have been GSK that bought emraclidine. They're very bullish on that. So, this is why, because it looks like it has a high likelihood of success, but it's still very early in its lifespan. I thought this is from a company called MapLight, which was founded by actually some people from Stanford. Carl Dijsselrath and Rob Malenka are on there. So, 2 of our leading neuroscientists, probably Carl Dijsselrath will win the Nobel Prize at some point for some of his work. And they have stuck their flag in, they're looking at a number of different illness areas, but they've stuck their flag in for schizophrenia as the M1/M4 muscarinic agonist, and they have chosen the KarXT style, so co-formulated with the peripherally active antagonist. So we'll see how that goes. Again, they're sort of in the beginning of phase 2, so they still have a ways to go, but it's just interesting that this is, not just is there a medicine going to come out with this, but we're already seeing the Me Too's coming down the line. All right, I'm going very fast, but we will have time for some questions hopefully as well at the end. I don't see any questions just yet, but again, feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A section. So iclopertin, this is a medicine that we just closed enrollment for the clinical trial for this. Iclopertin is a glycine transporter antagonist, and so it helps to essentially we've known for a long time that glutamate and glycine, which are neurotransmitters that are affected that impact cognition. There have been a number of drugs that have tried this mechanism, and they look amazing in animals. They look amazing in the beginning phases, and then they fail in phase 3. So iclapertin is in phase 3. I'm hoping that, again, it's just a better version of what we have found before, or that the studies are going to be better. But it has made it this far into phase 3. One can only hope that that it will actually be able to make it, because it would be nice to have something that can help with cognition. Enrollment just closed, so it's going to be a year and change until people are finished with the study. And after that, of course, they'll have to get the second study that's also ongoing, and we'll see if it can make it. But a couple years away until we all have some answers on iclapertin in all likelihood. But here is a little bit of reason for optimism, right? This is why the company is moving forward with it. As you can see, especially like the lower doses doesn't do so much, but you actually want to see that placebo and low doses are not that dissimilar, right? And that when you get to the right dose, suddenly you get some benefit. So cognition studies are incredibly difficult. It's hard to really enhance cognition over the course of 12 weeks. It takes a lot. People often cognitive symptoms often predate the sort of obvious psychotic symptoms, and can take a long time to remediate that. So it's hard to really see a difference. And the other part is there's so much that it only really matters if it makes functional changes. So we'll see, but at least it's worth knowing that there's something there. This is a drug called luvadaxistat, which is also this focuses on D-serine and the D-amino acid oxidase inhibitor, which helps to increase the amount of glutamate transmission and ultimately help with cognition. And so D-amino oxidase is an enzyme that breaks the substrate down, and so this helps to you inhibit the inhibitor, and therefore you can have more transmission, and hopefully will help. This is a study. We also just closed enrollment for a study on this medicine. So fingers crossed that we'll see again in about the similar time frame to the iclapertin, that maybe there's going to be some benefit there. Again, fingers crossed. All right, moving at the speed of light. So valbenazine, this is a drug that's already on the market. This is also called Ingrezza. And this medicine is used for tardive dyskinesia, the side effect that people can get from long-term antipsychotic use, movement disorder side effect. Turns out, though, that it's what's called a VMAT2 inhibitor, and that helps with essentially making, again, for sort of better dopamine transmission. And what can help manage the tardive dyskinesia might actually also help with it as an antipsychotic. We are still recruiting folks for this study, similar to the CAR-XT study. It's for folks who have residual symptoms of psychosis, but are otherwise relatively stable and haven't been in the hospital and things like that recently. So we're very excited to get some folks to try this. It seems to me, I'm interested in this in particular because it kind of is a 2-for-1. You can both mitigate the risk of tardive dyskinesia, and you can maybe help with the psychosis. So that is my quick run through of at least some of the medicines that are in the pipeline, mostly the ones that we are studying. I took a screenshot of our Stanford clinical trials page where you can search for schizophrenia and you can find the studies that we're doing. Now, I realize in doing this that they all are listed as recruiting, and that's just not the case. Some of them are actually quite old, so we're going to try to edit that down over the next couple of days. So if you look on here and it's changed, or you see something that sounds good, it might not still be available. But what I would say is, if you're interested at all in clinical trials, better to call us and we'll do some pre-screening questions and see if you're potentially eligible, rather than to decide not to call us, right? We can almost always find something for somebody. We also have a number of studies that are in more the basic science areas. So there's a lot of things that are going on at Stanford to try to help with improving treatment and understanding of what it's like to have psychosis and how best to help. So with that, I will maybe stop sharing my screen. I see there are some questions in the chat, so let me get to some of those. And I'm happy to take some questions for a little while longer. I see from the first question that I see in the chat is around insight. So that's a hard one. I don't know the answer to that. None of them are necessarily designed to look specifically at insight. You know, we don't generally have measures for insight or for anosognosia in the studies specifically. So, you know, if you were to consider it to be in some way, shape, or form like a delusion, maybe, you know, as positive symptoms improve, that might improve. But as I'm sure the question asker and many others here can relate to, it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg problem, and that can be hard. And it's also hard to get folks who don't think they need medicine because they don't think there's something wrong to take medicine, especially if it's going to cause side effects and be problematic. So what I would suggest, what we try to do at least, is to really work hard on engagement with people. We try to really lower the barrier of entry to coming in for treatment. At least at the Inspire Clinic, treatment is not, you don't have to take medicine to receive treatment. That's not a ticket of admission. Meeting with a psychiatrist is, but psychotherapy can be helpful. We have social work that is, we're actually going to hopefully launch some additional services pretty soon based on some grant funding that we got from the state of California. So what we try to do is try to make it as hospitable an environment as possible for people so that they can come in and then maybe they'll eventually start to they'll build trust, build some rapport, and be willing to try something that they might otherwise not think they necessarily were otherwise going to do. So that's very much a difficult one. I'm going to come back to the CAR XT side effects one. I want to answer this one about permanently eradicate. So at this point, again, it's an excellent question. You would think that would be where we are. You know, part of the challenge is that there isn't just one schizophrenia. So what we, and so at this point, when we study schizophrenia or we study people who experience schizophrenia, we're sort of often making our best guess as to, well, what exactly is causing the psychosis? And so since we don't know, we use medications that tend to kind of hammer the system and make things a bit better. And so they do a lot, and it's hard to really say with any specificity what they're doing, especially for any individual, to make things better, but they just kind of blanket things, which is why some of the side effects are so tricky. It's also one of the reasons why it can be hard when neuroscience finds a new potential pathway that's very specific. It can be very hard for a medication that targets that mechanism to be successful, because you don't always really know who is going to be the person who's going to benefit from that medication. And so it makes it really hard to sort of narrow it down. So no, the answer, as far as I know, is that there is nothing to permanently eradicate schizophrenia. I think that there are some folks with psychosis who would also say that permanent eradication is not even necessarily always their goal. I know that, again, that's sometimes easy to sort of say that from my position as a provider, as opposed to a family member in this context. But I would also say that there's a lot that people can do and who have psychosis, and so I would be okay with sort of permanently eradicating the distress and the difficulties that psychosis can cause. I'm okay with people having some residual symptoms. Again, especially if they're the types of symptoms that are not as taking people off of their ability to work towards their goals. Okay, so if a person is doing well on an injectable, we'll say Abilify in this case, but still has negative symptoms, which of these new medications works with ongoing injectables? Well, I mean, all of these new medicines would be potentially combinable with any antipsychotic on the market, injectable or not. All of the new ones intend to work through different mechanisms and ostensibly would be expected to be helpful synergistically. So Luvadaxistat and niclopertin are the two that are really being studied for negative symptoms right now. Those would be the ones that if they made it to the market, I would hope. But again, based on the sort of sort of tantalizing data from CAR-XT, from that might be another one to consider when it makes it to the market. So let's take that. Yeah, so a question about what is how to call us. Well, maybe I'll save that for the very end. We've done a lot of work to try to make our phone number a little bit more responsive. It is still obviously an ongoing work in progress. We get somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 calls per month looking for treatment. And so we have a lot of people working on trying to answer the phones. I am willing to take emails. So if in fact you call and you can't get through, and you looked on the clinical website and you think that it's that the insurance piece is not going to be a limitation, you feel like there's a reasonable chance that we might be able to take you on, then you should email me and I will do my best to respond to it in amongst the various things that I do. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 messages as well, but call and email and just persistence without being overly hostile, but persistence is helpful. And now on average, if you call looking for treatment, you are supposed to get a call back within 2 to 3 working days. And I saw the numbers today, and that seems to be the average. But with 800 calls a month, it's possible things might still fall through the cracks here and there. So the numbers on the website are accurate: 650-498-9111. But again, you can call me or email me. Okay. Great. So some more great questions are coming in. I see a question from Barbara about so the combination of medications, therapy, and support. So I don't think there's any one treatment that by itself is going to be fully sufficient. What we have seen is that, and the data supports that psychosis requires really a team approach. We wrote a whole book about that, which I have gotten approximately $4 in royalties for. So almost enough to buy myself a coffee. It is absolutely essential that the treatment is focused on where a person's goals are. It has to make sense to them participate in treatment. There has to be some reason. The same is true for anybody doing anything. If it doesn't feel authentic, you don't feel like your goals are somehow in alignment with the treatment you're being asked to do, then it's just not something that makes sense. And people who experience psychosis, they may get inputs that are not something that we can understand or share, and they come from random places and who knows what. But at the end of the day, with those inputs, most people are making relatively reasonable decisions based on that information. And so that's where, again, it gets obviously tricky. So medicine is great for many people at helping to kind of diminish the impact of some of those inputs that are giving false information. But it's for many people, and I would argue it's about 30 to 40% of people, it's not sufficient. Therapy, and I have the great fortune to work with some amazing CBT for psychosis therapists. Kate Hardy and her team do just tremendous work with people to give people new tools and skills to be able to understand what it is they're experiencing in a different way, potentially question that experience, recognize patterns, and do different things. Obviously, everybody exists within a context, and so I often talk about the sort of scaffolding that we all really need to do well in this world. I was over the weekend, the Northern Lights were here, and I was doing some work late at night, and I said, it's midnight. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to try to find the Northern Lights. I'm going to drive out, and I drove from my house over to just past 280, and I thought, it's going to be really dark. No one will be here. It's the middle of the night, and it turned out that I was not the only one with that idea, and there was dozens and dozens of cars, and I couldn't see the lights because there was cars and people frankly were drag racing, and it was a little scary. So I left, right? And I said, I'm going to go someplace else. And I went to Edgewood Park, again, near my house. And I was the only person there, and it was dark. And all I could hear was the animals, and I was scared. And I thought, well, all I really needed was one other person just to have a little chit chat with me to keep the animal sounds at bay. It's like that. It's hard to do things when you're totally isolated, and if mental illness leads people to isolation, that in and of itself is hard to overcome. Even if I had a magic pill that eradicated all symptoms and made everything better right away. So having some of those supports, having that scaffolding, keeping as much of that as is reasonable and possible is really essential. We know that keeping people engaged in school or work pays tremendous dividends, and so we put a big emphasis on that. But in other contexts, it's family supports. It's making sure that people have some connection to the world, so that when they're doing better, it's there waiting for them, as opposed to they suddenly are doing better, but they look around to their left, they look to their right, and there's nobody around, and it's hard to decide or even realize that things are better. And frankly, I initially misread your question, and I thought you were asking about play and to what extent does play help the outcome. But I'm going to say that that's also important too. And so we have started actually a number of different things in the clinic recently. We have a wonderful new social worker who is working on starting a music group, getting people to play sports together, has started a walking group, doing things that are, again, socially connecting and fun. We've also started with one of our therapists, a therapeutic movement group, which is what we're calling it because it's essentially kind of theater games, but we don't want people to feel intimidated by that idea. And it's just silliness, and it's being silly. And I'm sure there's a lot more depth to it than that. But from what I gather, it's just learning how to kind of be silly with other people and take a risk and take a social chance that you can do some kind of acting thing that you wouldn't otherwise do, and that people will respond well to you with that. So all of the above is what I would say there. All right, looking through here, a question on genetic testing. I am not that in favor of genetic testing. I'll tell you why. You would think at this point that we could absolutely do genetic testing. We know that if you take genome-wide samples of thousands of people with schizophrenia, you can find very small signals or a number of different genes that put together can confer a reasonable amount of the risk for genetic risk for schizophrenia. However, each individual risk is minute. There, with the exception of a couple of families, there's no sort of single gene for schizophrenia or for depression or for really any of the complex psychiatric conditions. And so genetic testing is only really useful in one and so I don't really understand how the genetic testing companies are able to market themselves the way they do, which is they make it seem like do our genetic test and we'll tell you what medicine to take. What the genetic testing can do, in my opinion, is it can tell you, it's not in my opinion, the data bears this out, it can tell you which, it can tell you which, if you have a couple of different kinds of enzymes in your liver that can break down the certain medicines more rapidly or more slowly, it can give you an indication of why you might be more likely to have side effects at a low dose or inefficacy at a high dose, and give you some indication that, you know what, it's not so much that this medicine is not a good fit, it's that you're dosing it way too high for this person's metabolism or way too low for this person's metabolism, and give you some indication to change that way. It does not tell you that drug A is going to be better than drug B, or that this is going to be, responsive to this mechanism or that. And most of the data that they cite that would tell you that has been debunked when you start looking at larger samples of people. And so I think much of what GeneSight and these other, Genomind and all these companies do is, I think, irresponsible. Much in the way that I think it's irresponsible to suggest that there are certain brain scans that can be done that will tell you what treatment to take, like at the Amen Clinic. I find that to be, unfortunately, something that makes a lot of sense. That you would think it's 2024, we have AI. Like, why can't we do that yet? And the answer is that this is all very, very complicated, and therefore it just can't be boiled down to a spec scan or genetic test, unfortunately. All right, let me go through a few more. So yeah, I will send the slides. Schizophrenia and concussions. So one of the tricky things about concussions are that they tend to make you ineligible for most clinical trials. So it's really hard to say for certain what would be the right medicine. Generally speaking, if a person has a head injury, that does make things a little more difficult. One has to work behaviorally with treating the head injury, and to kind of manage along with what is sort of the behavioral context there, and sort of if there are specific symptoms that are amenable to medication, to look there to try to make heads or tails. But there isn't really a specific medication. It doesn't necessarily change the medication algorithm per se. And then just so everybody knows, clinical trials are voluntary. They're actually, you get paid for your time participating in clinical trials. There are no charges associated with it. And so we will even pay for your Uber or whatever, your Lyft, to come work with us. Different trials, take different amounts of time. And so we compensate people for time. We don't compensate specifically for risk, but all trials have some risk associated with them. Trials are, of course, also geared for the trial's benefit, not for the individual's benefit. But of course, we sort of always hope that people will do a little bit better. And in general, people who participate in clinical trials do better overall because they take a more active role in their treatment. They're more, again, they're willing to sign a consent form that identifies a diagnosis, which that in and of itself is an indication around sort of insight. And so hopefully, it's as easy as it can be to be in a clinical trial. And we work with, again, if you're not receiving treatment in the Inspire Clinic, we will want to make sure that we work with your outside doctor to let them know that you're on the trial, not to make changes that would take you out, but also so that they can partner with us to make sure things are okay. All right, we have just a few more minutes. I want to see if I can get to as many of these questions as I can. And Marie, you'll give me the high sign when it's time to wrap up.
I also think you have one holistic question in there. The one that says, would you describe schizophrenia as a brain illness? What do you say to people who are skeptical that it's a real illness?
Okay, so if you put me and Kate Hardy, my psychologist colleague, on a panel, you would probably get different answers to that question. I think that there's a lot to unpack. First of all, it's very clear to me that you can model psychosis, and you can find certain brain circuits that if you overstimulate or understimulate, or you give a amphetamine or other kinds of molecules, you can cause psychosis in people who wouldn't otherwise have psychosis. That there's no question that for some people it is something that is happening in their brain. I think that, to me, it's easy to say that if a person is hearing voices, that even though the experience feels like it is from outside of their brain, in essence, the reason the voices can so carefully monitor what that individual is doing and speak to what that individual is thinking is that on some level it's coming from within their brain. However, that does not mean that schizophrenia is exclusively a brain disorder. And I come from a medical background, having studied in medical school, and I tend to think of a medical model first. But I think if Kate were to hear and would talk about that question, she would talk about stress vulnerability and other things. She would be more inclined to talk about the effects of kind of trauma and growing up, and that in essence, there are some people for whom those are probably the more salient routes. It's also clear that there's some people for whom the route to experiencing psychosis goes through having some kind of autoimmune process or a brain tumor or some other kind of inflammatory process. There's just so many different ways that I can't give it one. And so it sounds like a cop-out. It's not, I don't mean it for it to be that way. But if I were to simply say schizophrenia is a brain disease and that's the end of the discussion, I would be selling the complexity short. On the other hand, if I were to say that the brain is not involved, then I would feel like I'm sort of misleading what I have come to experience and believe from the work that I have done. Any other ones I need to make sure I hit, Marie, before we wrap up?
I think you've kind of captured all of them, Ravina. They're very similar in nature.
I do see that. So there's the genetics question about passing it along to children.
Yeah.
So again, it's difficult to say. So, and I'm not a genetic counselor or geneticist, so I don't want to get it wrong. It's not 100%. First of all, identical twins who share a genome, the data used to say was 50% likelihood of what we call concordance, where they would both get schizophrenia. If one got it, the other would get it. Recently, I think that number has been called into question as I think actually a little bit lower than that. It really does get down to some of the complexity. So I think, at the end of the day, it's obviously is a difficult decision to decide sort of how to approach that. It's clear that the risk will be increased compared to the background rate. However, I work with a number of people who have children and a number of people who are the children of people with schizophrenia, and you know who don't have schizophrenia themselves, and I treat the parent. So you know it's really hard to say. It really has to end up being an individual decision, and it's one that I do work on with people. We talk about it in great depth and go back and forth on sort of what the options are and all of that. So how about with that, we will leave it there. If I didn't get to your question, again, my email address, jballon@stanford.edu. Feel free to send me a question. I'd be happy to try to catch it as best as I can in the next couple of days. If you're interested in clinical trials, you may email me, or you can look on our website and you'll see contact information for my coordinators. And they would be happy to talk with you about the studies we have currently. Particularly, again, looking at people who have some level of symptom, but not enough that they have been in and out of the hospital a lot lately. Also looking for people who are within the first 3 to 5 years of their illness and are willing to do what's called a PET scan, which looks at that's looking at trying to understand what's called the neuronal pruning hypothesis of schizophrenia, which we didn't even get into today, but is it very interesting. And anybody who does have tardive dyskinesia, this one is actually a very easy one. I'm looking for 5 more people by the end of the month to be part of a registry of folks that we will check in with every 3 to 6 months, just to see how tardive dyskinesia is impacting your sort of psychology or your, your willingness to be social or your mood. And you get like $75 for it. And also we'll check to make sure that, there's no worsening of the TD that you might have. So if there's anybody on here with tardive dyskinesia, definitely email me, because this one doesn't have any real risks to it because there's no intervention associated with it. And so pretty minimal risk there. But we're looking for, I think, 4 or 5 more people. And that study only has about 2 more weeks of recruitment. And then we'd be checking in periodically over the course of the next 3 years with that one. So, and you can even do that one remotely. So anyway,
Dr. Ballon, if you can just send this information to me about it, and we can post it on our website, because we do post information about clinical trials on our website. And so maybe you'll be able to, it might reach other folks as well.
Absolutely. Be happy to send you all that information, and we'll keep everybody posted. And
thank you.
Again, it's been my real pleasure to come. I only wish we could have been, sort of in person. I remember meeting everybody in San Jose a few years back to do this, and it's nice, but being able to do it from home, then I can still attend the baseball game. So that worked out well too.
Well, thank you. We really appreciate you making the time. And I'm sure a lot of people got, a good idea of what you're looking for and what's important and how to move forward. So thank you. I mean, it's a big issue with our community, as you well know.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Marie, for the invitation.
Okay.
And
thank you
so much, Dr. Ballon.
Right. Take care. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And thanks everyone for joining us tonight. We'll see you next month.
Bye, Ravina.